Your new music picks for summer and fall of 2022 are here. Hey everyone, Cadaver Kelly here. If you're a returning viewer, welcome back. If you're new here, I'm an underground music journalist with a focus in post-punk wave, death rock, goth rock, synth pop, and dark punk. In this video, I'm going to be sharing my picks for new music releases from June through November of 2022. This list includes albums and EPs. It does not include singles. This will include all of the genres within the typical goth umbrella, as well as some other independent alternative genres like industrial and shoegaze. As always, I will leave a link in the description to a full list of these releases on Bandcamp. Without further ado, let's get right into this list, starting with June of 2022. On June 6th, Philadelphia-based post-punk band The Ire released a 9-track album called What Dreams May Come. I love The Ire. I got the chance to see them live in 2019, and they put on an incredible show. I would recommend them to fans of first wave dark post-punk. If you're into bands like Skeletal Family, check them out. On June 10th, LA-based darkwave artist Cold Showers released a 5-track EP called Strength in Numbers. This one combines post-punk with elements of 80s-style synth pop. Also on June 10th, Denver-based dark electronic artist Cassette released a 10-track album called Pomegranate Death. This album is an experimental mix of sounds ranging from synth pop to industrial to goth. I have 3 releases from June 17th. The first is an 11-track album from Brooklyn-based post-punk band London Plane. The album is called Bright Black, and it mixes 70s-style post-punk sounds with brighter, more modern indie pop elements. The second release from June 17th comes from Seattle-based synth-pop artist Hexheart. Hexheart is the recent solo project of Jason Banger from God Module. I got to see him perform live at Absolution Fest this year, and it was a mesmerizing performance. This album is called Funeral Flowers and has 9 tracks. Check it out if you want to hear a great modernized take on 80s-style synth pop. The third release from June 17th comes from Cleveland-based electronic artist Nvoke. It is a 3-track EP called Days Gone By. This is a very ethereal, atmospheric synthy EP. On June 22nd, Athens, Georgia-based death rock band Tears for the Dying released a 5-track EP called Eyes Wide Open in the Dark. This one has a few tracks that are a little more of a laid-back post-punk sound than Tears for the Dying's previous releases, though the track Mortuary still has a very punky death rock sound to it. Also on June 22nd, Tampa-based post-punk band Sleeping Pills released an 8-track album called A Bend in Time. This album has a classic dark post-punk sound to it, but almost has some surf rock undertones in the mix as well. So if you're into both gothy post-punk and mid-century music, this one will be uniquely tailored to your taste. On June 24th, American goth rock band October Burns Black released a 10-track album called Two Worlds Collide. If you're a fan of 90s third wave goth rock, check it out. I only have 2 releases from July of 2022. Both were released on July 29th. The first is a 4-track EP from Russian cold wave artist Monoplan, the title of which translates to Under the Sky of Sleeping Cities. This album has that Eastern European lo-fi electronic post-punk sound, so if you're a fan of bands like Molchat Dama, check it out. The second release comes from LA-based post-punk band Death Bells. It is a 9-track album called Between Here and Everywhere. This is not a goth or dark post-punk album. It has more of that classic, brighter late 70s garage post-punk sound to it, so if you're into that kind of music, you may enjoy this album. I have 4 releases from August of 2022. On August 8th, Ukrainian dark electronic artist Blacklight District released a 16-track album called The Process. This album is an experimental mix of sounds that includes elements of post-punk, synth-pop, goth rock, and industrial. Overall, it is very dark, and I think a lot of my gothy friends will dig it. On August 15th, Mexican darkwave artist Soma released a 12-track album called Senza. This album blends classic post-punk and synth-pop sounds and is very mellow and dark. On August 19th, California-based synth-pop and darkwave artist Vandal released a 12-track album called Queen of the Night. I would describe this as very danceable synth-pop with hints of dark post-punk sprinkled in. I love Vandal and this album did not disappoint. On August 27th, UK-based darkwave artist The Secret Experiment released a 6-track EP called The Morning. If you're into 80s-style post-punk-based darkwave and synth-pop, this one may be for you. Moving along to September of 2022. On September 2nd, Oakland, California-based dark punk band Gaggers released a 6-track EP called Low Hanging Fruit. This album falls somewhere between death rock and punk rock, so if you're a darkling with a punk side, give it a listen. On September 9th, Riveting Music released a 21-track compilation album called Regulate This. This album features industrial artists covering music celebrating female artists from the 80s and 90s. All proceeds from the album go to the Global Fund for Women. Also on September 9th, Austin, Texas-based dark electronic artist Mackey released a 10-track album called Immoral Emporium. I got to see Mackey live at Absolution Fest in 2021, and he put on a really energetic performance. I would recommend this to fans of electronic and industrial. I have 3 releases to share from September 23rd. The first is a 10-track album from German 2000s death rock favorite Bloody Dead and Sexy. The album is called Fade to Glitter and stays true to the band's death rock roots. The second release comes from LA-based industrial artist The Soft Moon. It is an 11-track album called Exister. This album has a slightly harder sound than some of The Soft Moon's previous releases. I would recommend this to fans of industrial. The third release from September 23rd comes from Chicago-based post-punk and synth-pop artist Kill Scenes. It is a 12-track album called Mask. It is an experimental mix of sounds with a lot of synth-pop elements throughout. On September 26, Portuguese darkwave artist Order and Chaos released a 12-track album called Skin. I would recommend this album to fans of 90s darkwave. On September 30th, Brooklyn-based darkwave duo The Vacant Lots released an 8-track album called Closure. This has that modern goth wave sound, combining elements of 80s synth-pop and post-punk with a modern twist. On to October of 2022. On October 3rd, Italian darkwave artist Chemical Waves released a 15-track album called Emotional Violence. This is in collaboration with a number of other artists and features a range of sounds including darkwave, post-punk, synth-pop, and ethereal. On October 7th, Dallas, Texas-based electronic rock duo NITE released a 7-track EP called Hallelujah, Your Ego Is Gone. It features a variety of sounds from rock to synth-pop to industrial. If you're into both dark underground music as well as 90s and 2000s alternative rock, you may dig this one. On October 11th, Athens, Georgia-based goth pop band Vision Video released a 10-track album called Haunted Hours. I would say this album is a combination of late 70s dark pop and 80s post-punk influences with a modern twist. I would recommend this album to fans of The Cure and former fans of The Smiths. On October 14th, Portuguese goth band IAMTHESHADOW released a 12-track album called The Wide Starlight. This album is a mix of post-punk goth and darkwave. Also on October 14th, Chicago-based shoegaze band The Burying Kind released a 12-track album called Tragic Airwaves. I would recommend this album to all the shoegaze fans out there. On October 21st, Chicago darkwave artist Panic Priest released an 11-track album called Psychogoria. I've seen Panic Priest live a number of times and he's one of the most impressive live performers I've ever seen. I can't recommend Panic Priest enough. I think Psychogoria may be my favorite release of his yet. Second release this video from The Secret Experiment. On October 26th, the UK darkwave artist released a 4-track EP called Wreckage. The Secret Experiment puts out more frequent releases than any other artist I follow, and it's all really solid darkwave, so I really respect that. On October 28th, Asheville, North Carolina-based post-punk band Secret Shame released an 11-track album called Autonomy. This is a really beautiful dark post-punk album and at times borders on the harder side of post-punk. I really loved this album. I have 3 releases from Halloween. The first comes from Portland-based post-punk band Softkill. On October 31st, they released a 10-track album called Canary Yellow. I love Softkill and got the chance to see them live this summer. They are even better live than they are on the albums, which is saying a lot because their albums are great. Canary Yellow did not disappoint. The second Halloween release comes from Las Vegas goth duo Pitch After Dark. They released a 14-track album called Dark and Severe. This album was very appropriate for Halloween because it is very haunting and gothy. If you're into 90s goth, you'll probably love this album. The last Halloween release comes from Australian synth-pop artist Death Comes Crawling. It is a 9-track album called Forever Morbid. This album is very synth-pop driven, but also has some elements of post-punk and darkwave in the mix. It's a really beautiful album for all of you 80s fans. Finally, we will cover November of 2022. On November 1st, Oakland, California-based death rock band False Figure released a 10-track album called Castigations. This album has a really cool modern dark post-punk sound to it. I got to see False Figure live at Skullfest in 2019, and they are absolutely incredible live. I would highly recommend going if you ever get the chance to see them. On November 4th, French electronic duo Minuit Machine released a 7-track album called 24. I would say this album is a mix of synth-pop, electro, and ethereal elements. Also on November 4th, Swedish darkwave band The Secret French Postcards released a 10-track album called Life Got Claws. This mixes elements of first-wave post-punk and synth-pop with a modern twist. They're a really great band, so if you're into more mellow darkwave, check them out. On November 8th, UK-based goth rock band Sirens of Light released a 10-track album called Nullus Margus Gothica 2021. According to their Bandcamp page, this album was originally written and recorded in 2004 and given a limited release in 2005. Then it was lost to the times for a number of years and rediscovered and remastered. I would recommend this album to fans of 90s goth rock. On November 11th, Austin, Texas-based electronic artist SINE released a 17-track album called Mantis Complete. This is a combination of 2 EPs released earlier in the year, Mantis 1 and Mantis 2. I actually got to see SINE perform some of this at Absolution Fest in 2021, and it was a really cool performance. It was part electronic music set, part performance art. There's a lot of cool electronic and industrial sounds in this album, but there's also a really cool electronic cover of the Gloves Sexy makeup on it as well, so check it out. On November 14th, Austrian synthpop artist Blank Picture released a 5-track EP called Das Haus. This is a very dark synthpop EP and borders on darkwave at times. It's a really cool piece of synthpop if that's your thing. On November 18th, Detroit goth duo VAZUM released a 3-track EP called The Precious Ones. This EP has a very death rock sound to it, so here's one of the few releases from this season for my death rockers out there. Also on November 18th, Swedish darkwave band A Projection released a 12-track album called In a Different Light. I would say this one leans a little more on the synth-pop side with some goth and post-punk elements in the mix. This is a really cool album for all the darkwave and synth-pop fans out there. On November 22nd, French darkwave artist Alex Sindrome released a 15-track album called Eject. This album is also a mix of synth-pop and darkwave, and it's in French language. It's a really cool album, and one thing I respect about Alex Sindrome is the length of these albums. There are a lot of tracks on Alex Sindrome albums. On November 25th, UK-based goth duo Corlyx released a 12-track album called Blood in the Disco. Corlyx were one of my favorite discoveries from Absolution Fest this year. Their live performance was just awesome, and their sound is really original and not formulaic. Overall, this is just a really great album. Please check them out. Finally, on November 29th, Irish goth rock artist pMad released an 11-track album called Who, Why, Where, What. pMad is just some really solid goth rock and doesn't sound like the 100th Sisters of Mercy clone. It's really refreshing to see so much goth rock being released that brings something original to the table. There you have it, folks, your new music picks for summer and fall of 2022. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.